Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. My name is Vineet Malhotra. Well, Prime Minister Modi has met with the Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. As the two leaders hold talks and vow to boost cooperation, there is a larger battle for Africa that is on. As you know, China has vowed financing of $50 billion in 3 years to infrastructure projects in Africa. India was the reason why African Union is a part of the G20 now, and with this region that is rich in resources being contested for decades, India has pushed to be the voice of the global south, and Africa plays a key role in it. So where are India's ties with Africa, and how important is this visit to Nigeria in the larger African context is what we will discuss in the next 30 minutes. Joining us to talk about this is Ambassador Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Pathakrit Payan, Geopolitical analyst with us on the show as well. Group Captain UK Devnath, defense expert, also joins us on the program. Ambassador Shashank, I'll begin with you, sir. So how do you see, this strategic tie-up between these two countries and of course the entire continent of Africa when it comes to the Prime Minister's visit to Nigeria? Obviously, in my monologue, I also talked about the presence of China and how it is always laying out a trap for these less developed and economically stronger countries, to fall in that trap. Do you think India has a favorable chance of getting on their good side? Not that we haven't done, the needful in the past, especially by including them in G20.
Yes, quite right. Nigeria is the largest populated country in Africa and very rich in resources. This is a pity that most of the resource-rich countries in Africa have lost much of their wealth. Either their own people have kept it in the Western banking institutions, or they have been controlled mostly by the foreign multinationals. But I remember interacting with the Nigerian diplomats in different areas, especially in the UN forum, and I found them extremely bright, very capable people. And many of the Nigerian military experts and others, they have been trained in India. So I remember that whenever I went to any shopping areas, I would always find many Nigerian ladies here and with their bright clothes and looking for goods made in India. So I think there is an old connection between Nigeria and India, which we can now work upon. If you remember that African countries, many of them became the very poor developing countries, LDCs, not Nigeria, but most of them. And so the World Bank and the traditional donors imposed several sanctions on them. They wanted transparency in governance, good behavior, and they wanted them to repay all their earlier loans before they could be given new ones. That is the time when China appeared on the scene, and they have shown that they have deep pockets. They have been not only making Africa part of their BRI, but secondly, they have been also taking over charge of many of their ports and resources by setting up joint ventures or Chinese companies in these areas. Now, India initially was regarded in the same basket as China. And I remember reading many articles in the Western media criticizing India and China that they are the new colonialists who have taken over when the old colonialists forgot about it and they became good partners with Africa. It is India and China who wanted to control all the resources of the African countries. However, very soon it became very clear, because we found that many of the African leaders themselves, they went to the international fora and they said that this is all wrong. India has been going by the priorities set by the national governments in Africa. And the Ethiopians, I think they were the strongest. They said, look, we don't have many resources. And still, India is a very valuable partner for us in the field of agriculture, education, and also in bringing about closer relations between African Union, which is located in Ethiopia headquarters. So I think these are the kind of things, and India has set up partnerships with many of the sub-regional forums in Africa. And if you see that this tele-education, telemedicine, these are the two major projects where many Indian universities and medical centers have been linked with the African institutions. So it is building the capacity of the human beings in Africa, because that is one thing which India specializes in. It is not just a question of good governance, democracy, but it is also a question of uh, the bottoms up approach, that you find out who are the people who want to get educated in the most modern technology, skill development, etc. And so India has set up now the IIT campus is there in Zanzibar, if you remember, and many more campuses of different institutions have been set up in different countries, especially on IT, skill development, entrepreneurship. So I think these are the kind of things, and many of the East African countries, of course, are on a different side, because we have many people of Indian origin who made place there. So we have we call the PIOs, and they are in a completely different category. But even the Western side, we have set up very good relationship with the countries. We have a Team 9 partnership, which started as Team 9, I think, in Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time, where we gave them $500 million worth of credit and lines of credit. And that was very much appreciated by them. And then Nigerians also, I remember, came at that time, wanted that Nigeria and India should now develop a strong relationship. So I think now under Prime Minister Modi, we are taking these steps. I'm quite sure that this will be a very, very rewarding partnership for both countries. And G20 is one area where India has taken the lead in bringing in the whole of African continent as a member of G20. So I think going by the priorities set by the African countries, and secondly, giving them a proper space for their leadership in the international forums. I think these are the special features of the Indian partnership with the African countries. Thirdly, I would say that the private sector industry in the medium and small scale sectors, we have found that African Union has agreed to set up a partnership with their Indian organization on MSMEs, and that is called the India-Africa Economic Foundation, which is setting up its headquarters in Mumbai, and where they would have all the partner African countries located there. They would have their offices, and that is not on the basis of giving loans or anything like this, but they would be to be based on actual business relationship and transfer of skills on both sides.
Pathakrit, what does this relationship mean to you, and what does India's endeavor as well as interest in Africa mean geopolitically for our economy, as well as in some way counterbalancing what China has been up to in Africa for many years now?
Look, Vineet, it is true that in Africa, colonialism was replaced by neocolonialism. It has been exploited to the hilt by corporations. And if you look at the behavior of many of these multilateral financial institutions, it has only been to benefit their main sponsors in Africa, in Europe and America. They do not keep much they do not think much about the interests of the African countries. So to that extent, you see today there's a pushback happening against that new colonialism in Africa. And what India has done in terms of number one, giving African Union the space in G20 is a great thing, because never before any forum actually thought about including them. And the Western you put it this way, the global North was never interested in sitting in the same table with African Union. So we at the same time we must understand G20 or BRICS. These are even today forums. They are not giving hard alternatives to these African countries. When it comes to when we say that we can give alternates, India is a great country. They look up to for education, for training, for developmental work, for philanthropy. But we must also understand that somewhere we must realize that these countries are also very aspirational today. It's not just about some philanthropy. It's not just about some educational loans. It's just not just about some bit of developmental work. We need to have, if we genuinely want to counter what China is doing, then we need to have alternates to what China was offering in terms of Belt and Road Initiative, which will not minus the debt trap objective. And because the reason I'm saying this is this, most of these countries, we must understand why did they go towards the Belt and Road Initiative knowing the traps. Because the multilateral institutions, financial institutions were not willing to give them money, and because there was an urgent requirement of most of these countries to develop their infrastructure, so nobody else was giving. and whoever was giving, they went towards them. So either India needs to develop an alternate mechanism for institutional financing of development on a commercial basis in African countries, or the other option, as the ambassador rightly mentioned, that every time somebody goes from here to the African countries, be it the Honorable Prime Minister or the President or the External Affairs Minister, we should have an entourage of large number of Indian investors and industrialists. I'm sure that some may have gone this time also. If not, then I think this should be a norm than an exception, because ultimately they are looking at hard transactions. The African countries are also looking for that. They are no more looking for charity. So I think they look up to India. They respect India as a lot, as a very good country. But it's not just about being kind and nice. They're looking for somebody who can actually give them what they want. And this is where we need to also introspect as to whether we are giving that or not, and whether we need to develop those alternate mechanisms or not. It is not about what we think we should give. It is about what they have requirement for. And we must understand somewhat China did understand that. China may have created problems for them, but they required large amount of investments in development of ports, development of airports, development of highways, and we need to look into that in that manner. So either develop alternate financial mechanism, developing dedicated financial institutions for multilateral lending to developing countries or rapidly developing economies of Africa, or allow the Indian investors, industrialists, partner with them to put it up there. And we must understand, we have a shared history with Africa in terms of colonialism, the atrocities of colonialism. So just as we have emerged as a voice of the Global South essentially includes the whole of Africa, no denial about that. So taking them along is extremely important. Being by their side is extremely important. But if you genuinely want to counter what the Chinese or the Western funded multilateral institutions have been doing, you need to create your own alternate multilateral financial institutions. Question is, have we done that or not? If we have not done that, no problem. I'm not saying India has not done anything. India has done a lot of work. All I'm saying is that this is the next step we should take. And of course, in terms of defense, there's a huge amount of potential. In terms of exports, well, Indian products are in large demand in the African countries, primarily because Indian products are very durable. It's not a use and throw concept that the Africans have. Just like the Indians, they actually believe in conserving things. They actually buy something keeping in mind that they will be used by the next generation as well. So Indian goods are there. What I'm saying is this: there has to be more investments. There are investments by the PSUs happening, but the private sector has to be nudged and supported by the Indian government to put up factories over there. And I'm sure Africa has great potential, but the potential has never been translated into reality. They have always been usurped and used. I think they look up to India as a partner, and we have the potential to actually deliver them in terms of converting their own potential into reality. Back to you.
Group Captain Devnath, what about India's defense exports? How does Africa feature into that scheme of things?
Vineet, Nigeria is probably, it will give us a foothold on the western coast of Africa. We do want one friendly country on the western coast of Africa who will give, while our naval ships are plying in Atlantic Sea, rest and recuperation facilities. Another thing is that we definitely want Nigeria to give us a foothold. Probably it will be gateway for us to western Nigeria, countries like Chad, Central African Republic, Cameroon, Burkina Faso. These all countries are looking forward to India for their small military needs. Definitely Nigeria maintains reasonably healthy defense forces. India can always offer them help in training, equipment, and most important, in their strategic positioning in Africa. In Africa, there are 2-3 countries who are competing for a superior role in Africa. Egypt remains one of them. South Africa is one of them. Nigeria is also one of them. These countries are ambitious. So India has offered them training facilities for our BrahMos missile, Akash surface to air defense missile systems. In coming years, probably when Tejas Mark 1A matures and we have certain surplus production line coming up, we will offer Tejas Mark 1A also to countries in Africa like Nigeria. Traditionally, Nigerian officers have been training with Indian Army and Indian Navy for decades at various staff college level as well as during basic training at Indian Military Academy, Air Force Academy and Naval Academy. So I presume that in coming years, Indian Navy will benefit to a great deal in case we can get some kind of a logistics MOU signed with Nigeria for basic needs, rest, recuperation, refueling of Indian naval ships. Yes, Vineet.
You're absolutely right, and I'm going to take, in fact, a cue out of what Pathak also said, that Ambassador Shashank, an ecosystem has to be created whereby the Indian private sector can also facilitate this growth, if there is the right government backing and if there is the right government impetus.
Together, at the same time, the government does not get directly involved in promoting any particular business house, but it is really for the business houses to take the lead. And I'm quite sure that if they approach the government should be ready to give the lines of credit, which they have extended very liberally for the African countries. Also, there are training programs and scholarships which are offered to many African countries. So idea is that since India has concentrated on human skill development and manpower development, so I think we can work along with the African countries in that direction. The Africans have tremendous amount of resources, there is no doubt about it. And therefore that fear remains that the Africans feel that, well, the other country is coming only to get control over the resources. This has been their experience in the past. So this has to be a sustained effort on the part of the Indian sector, private sector, as well as the government, to ensure that the Africans see them as long-term partners in their growth trajectory. I think in that regard, I would also say that our private sector also needs to make sure that if they go into any particular African country, they make a reliable base there, so that if later on any repairs, replacement of parts or in technology upgradation, etc. are required, then they can be taken care of by those companies, by the Indian companies, and gradually they can set up their joint venture partnership by skill development, so that the local people can themselves take care of this area. Because I think in the old days, we did not have that much of money available for lines of credit. Normally smaller lines of credits were given, which were used to hand over a few jeeps, few trucks and things of that kind, or hand pumps. And later on, once they went out of order, it was very difficult to find the replacement for them or for repairs for them. And then immediately the Western partners would come and say, look, we always told you that the Indians would not be able to maintain them. So I think this has to be a new experience, that it has to be a sustained partnership. It has to be on the basis of our companies hand-holding their African partners, each individual country, wherever they are setting up their base, to carry on. And the other part, of course, if it's a question of pharmaceuticals, we have done very well in sending pharmaceuticals to the African countries. There we need to make sure that the regional and sub-regional groupings which they have in Africa, they are able to have regional bases for the Indian pharmaceuticals and other industrial products, which can then easily move from one country to the other. So therefore that issue remains. In some countries you need French language, in other countries English language or Portuguese, etc. So I think we need to make sure that we also take into account the regional groupings there and say that, well, all right, they should give free movement of Indian products in their regional grouping areas. So I think this has to be a question of mutual trust and mutual partnership I'm quite sure that when the Prime Minister is going there, he would be opening many of the doors there, and this will be seen as a very great initiative on the part of India, that the top leaders of India are going to Africa, to African countries. And Nigeria somehow felt always that we were concentrating more on the East African countries and on South Africa and the Arab countries like Egypt. So I think now that we are making a special effort, I'm quite sure that this will have a very good impact on the West African countries. I hope that the Nigerians would be taking active part in becoming members of G20, of the BRICS, and all these new partnerships are developing. And so their resources would be used for the Nigerians themselves, for the African people, and finally on the basis of mutual benefit with the Indians also.
Absolutely. And Pathikrit, how do you think India should leverage this influence that we've been able to create over these African countries? Not leverage in the negative sense, but leverage in the positive sense to get ahead in terms of its own economy and its stature in the world.
Vinit, this is exactly what I was saying, that they would have handshakes with us, great relation with us, but they'll keep on going to China for finances. Why does it happen? There are two things I want to say. No disrespect to anybody, and I am not trying to act unorthodox. We must learn something from United States. United States power is primarily because of the reach of its private sector. So we must go away from this hands-off approach. The government of India has to take the initiative to coordinate with the private sector and push investments in these South African countries, and primarily because there is a limitation to what the PSUs can do. There is absolute limitation on that. So private sector has to be pushed, and no private sector beyond India can actually operate independently without active support of the government. Be it any country, be it any company of anywhere. That's number one. Secondly, if you do not develop your alternate financial mechanism, if you do not develop those multilateral institutions to finance the developing countries, then what happens? They would handshake with you, but they'll keep on going to China or somewhere else, or they'll keep on going to IMF. How do you solve that? So all I'm saying is this: India has made tremendous strides. Prime Minister Modi has done incredible work in the last 10 years. But if you have to go from here to the next 10 years, then you have to think a little differently. You have to think like a big power. You cannot think, I will have a hands-off policy from the private sector. This is your private sector. Forget about what the opposition says. Forget about what Pakistan or America says. Forget about what others would say. Your infrastructure can be in the global arena built by the private sector. Your private sector is as Indian as the public sector is. It is not about promoting any particular organization, but about acting as a catalyst to push the private sector. Go there and say, go, do investment, do business. If any problem happens, I am there to support you. This is what the assurance that the private sector is looking for. And secondly, develop your multilateral institutions for financing the developing countries, or else you will have handshakes, great relationship, all kinds of things will happen, but invariably, we will not become indispensable. That indispensability will invariably remain with China. I have no love lost for China. I am not a supporter of the Communist Party at all. All I'm saying is this: please understand what they have done and what we should do. Back to you.
All right. Well, appreciate all the comments and all the perspectives that came in. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of this conversation. We take a short break on that note. Be right back.